Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Marianna, and today's workshop is going to be the engagement 101. So we are going to talk about the basics of the engagement with focus on the school style debating. But before I start, I'd just like to get to know you a little bit better. So I'll ask you 3 questions, and if your answer is yes, then please raise your hand on Zoom, or you can type on chat yes, and then I'll know on what level you are, and I will be able to adjust my language and the speed of today's workshop to your specific needs. So the first question is, do we have here some people that have already participated in the Polish Schools Debating Championships in the past? So for example, Polish Schools Debating Championships 2020, Polish Schools Debating Championships 2021. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, and I don't see anything typed on the chat, so I assume not. Okay, so the second question is, have any of you already participated in at least 3 debating tournaments, regardless of the tournament debating style? So 3 Oxford tournaments, 3 VP tournaments. If yes, then raise a hand. Okay, again, I don't see any hands raised. I don't see any comments on chat, so I assume that you haven't. And the last question is there anybody for whom this year Polish Schools Debating Championship is going to be the first tournament ever, like the first debating tournament that you're going to participate in? Okay, I see that for Anna, for Nina, for you, this is going to be the first debating tournament. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So during today's workshop, I'm going to try to use as understandable language as possible, but if at any point there will be some words that you don't know, don't understand, or if anything will be not clear, then just raise your hand, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to explain you everything, because this is the place that we just learn from each other, and don't be ashamed to ask questions. I'm here to explain everything. Okay, so moving on, the plan of today's workshop is that I am going to talk about all the basics of the engagement, and I'm going to answer all the crucial questions that you might have about the engagement. So what is it? Why do we do the engagement? Who does it in the school style debating? How to do it and when to do it? So this is the plan for today's workshop, and we are going to cover that, starting with the first most crucial question, which is, what is the engagement in the debating? Speaking in the simplest term, engagement is all the moments in the debate when you are not referring to your own material during your speech, but you are addressing your opponent's speeches. So at any point when you are not talking about your case and your arguments, but you are including the arguments of the other side, you are including any questions from the other side, that is the moment when you engage with the other side. So any moment when you just stop talking about your own material, your own case, and you start to include also the other side and your opponent's arguments, ideas, etc., etc. Do you know any type of engagement and would like to share? What comes to your mind when you hear engagement? What type of engagements do you think of?
POI, like points of information?
Yes, great. Engagement can be done through the POIs, so the points of information that we raise during debate. Great. Do you have any other things that you think when I say engagement?
Rebuttal?
Yes, great. Rebuttal is also a part of engagement. It's a core part of engagement, and we are going to focus on that the most during today's workshop. That's great. Do you guys have any other types of engagement? Okay.
Maybe summarizing?
Okay, summarizing, we are going to get to it, because usually when you summarize, you just repeat what already happened in the debate without really engaging with that material. So when you're just repeating it, you do not add anything new to the material that already happened, which means that there is very little of engagement, and it's just time consuming, and it doesn't bring a lot, because you're just repeating something that judges already have in your notes, and it's not adding anything new, but it's a good way of thinking. Okay, so if you don't have any more ideas, but all of them were good and great, then I'll show the 4 basic types of engagement. And we are going to focus on some more today, on some a little bit less. And the first one is the rebuttal. That's probably Sonia told us about. And this is this core type of engagement that we all do while debating, and we are going to focus on that today. Engagement is also offering and taking POIs. It's also a very important part of engagement. And within the school style debating, you should take at least 2 POIs during your speech, and you should try to offer at least 2 POIs while your opponent is speaking. You won't be punished for not taking POIs, meaning you cannot lose the debate because you didn't take a POI. However, it will be later reflected in your speaker points, in which you will get a little bit less speaker points, because not taking any POIs means that you are not able to strategically use your time during your speech if you are not able to take them. And we are going to come back to them at the end of the workshop if you will have time. However, I would just like to highlight that offering POIs is very good for you, as by offering POIs, you can clarify what your opponents are saying when you don't understand them. You can steal a little bit of your opponent's time and bring some rebuttals or bring some ideas for your argumentation. So you get some additional time during offering the POIs, but it's also very strategically good to take the POIs, not only for the speaker points, but also because when you take the POIs, they often show what is wrong within your argumentation, and you have time to fix your case. When you take the POI for the opponent team, you already hear that there is a problem and you can fix it just right away. So it's very good to offer and to take POIs. And then there are 2 more ways to engage that you have mentioned. And the first one is rebuilding. Rebuilding is a type of engagement when you engage with the rebuttal of the other side. So when the other side comes in the debate and rebut your own arguments, your arguments, then during your speeches, you should try to rebuild them. So if the other side said that, for example, your arguments are not true, then you probably should spend some time on explaining why actually your arguments are true, why the rebuttal of the other side is invalid and not correct in this debate, or give some other supportive mechanism to your argument so that it will stand out again. So this is the rebuilding. I guess this might be something new for you, but generally, very intuitively, rebuilding means making your case great again after the rebuttal of the other side. And the last way of engagement that we are also going to talk about today is weighing. Weighing usually happens later within the debate, and this is quite close to summarizing that Sonia talked about, or one of the members today. And weighing means that we take arguments of one side, arguments of the other side, we compare them, and we tell why our arguments are winning in this debate, why our arguments are better than the arguments of the other side. And by that, we just explain to judges why they should give the win to us, not to the other side. The difference between rebuttal and weighing is that with rebuttal, we are explaining that there is something wrong with the case of our opponents, and we point that out, and we explain why the arguments are either not true or they are not important. But with weighing, we just take the case of our opponent as it is, we don't do anything with it, and we just compare their arguments to our argument, and we show why our arguments are still better even without the rebuttal. So those are the main ways of engagement. And we are going to talk about them in greater detail in a second. But before that, do you have any questions to those 4 types of engagement? Okay.
I believe we don't have them.
You don't have what? Sorry?
I don't think I have questions about the ways of engaging, but could you say which role usually do what?
Yes, we will talk about this a little bit later, but that's a good question. We are going to talk about which role should do what in the school style, probably at the end of our workshop, but that's a good question. Okay, cool. So if there are any others, let's talk about why the engagement is so important. Why do we have this workshop? So for that, we have a case study that I prepared for you. Imagine that there is a debate on the motion this House would abolish grading system in schools, which means that you no longer can get a grade from a test, from your homework, etc., etc. And imagine that there is a debate between proposition and opposition, and both those teams say only things that you can see on the screen. So the proposition comes into the debate and says, abolishing the grading system in schools would improve students' learning processes. In the current world, students stress a lot about grades and exam scores. Grades are just numbers based on an arbitrary decision that 74% of correct answers on a test are C and 75% suddenly is a B. Grades don't show the effort that students put into studying, which leads to frustration and disappointment of many. That makes students unmotivated to learn. And studying is important as it allows people to develop the skills needed in adult life, broaden their general knowledge and independence. That's what the propositions say, nothing more. And then we have the opposition who says, abolishing the grading system in schools would worsen the students' learning processes. In the current world, students care a lot about grades and exam scores. Grades are a motivating factor as they are subjective, objective, and clearly show students' progress in a given subject. Without grades, students wouldn't know on what level their skills are and would be afraid of subjective teachers with no binding rules in evaluating students' work. That would make students unmotivated to learn, and then studying is important because it gives the skills, knowledge, and independence. After such speeches, who do you think won this debate? We can make voting. So let's say that you can vote on chat if you can. So people who think that proposition 1, just type proposition on the chat. People who believe that opposition 1, just type opposition on the chat. And we'll discuss those results in a second. I'll give you a moment to read it. Okay, and I don't see any answers, which could happen in that exercise. So my question is, if some of you have hardships with deciding who won, why is that so? If anybody wants to share.
I believe the hardship to decide which side is like the winning side is the fact that they present like the same idea for the topic, but on different perspective.
Yes.
It's like they're creating a vision, but the proposition presents like the differences of 1% that affects our grades. And that's it. And the opposition says are making some suggestions that it is a motivating factor. So they are opposing themselves, but it does not present what is better, what is worse in the comparison.
Yes,
for me,
Mhm.
it's difficult that we have only these arguments. We don't have this engagement, and I see two sides, but I don't see what they say later.
That's true. And that's why engagement is so important, because in the vacuum, those both arguments are valid. They're not the best, they're not great, they're pretty short, so they're not like winning arguments, but both of them are probable. And with no engagement between the sides, we cannot decide who wins. And that is a problem if we do not do any engagement within a debate, because later on the judge must decide by themselves who won the debate, and they are going to use their own weighing metrics, they are going to use their own thinking what is more probable to them, and you do not want to leave a situation that the judge is deciding for you that you lost or won the round. You want to give to the judge as many reasons why you are better than the other side as you can, so that later on when the judges are judging, they see why you should win that debate. And that is why engagement is so crucial, because this is the easiest way to show the judges that you are a little bit better and that you should win this round. Otherwise, as you can see on this example, it's just impossible to judge without any engagement, without any comparisons between the sides, because they're both the same, they're really symmetrical, they have the same impacts, the same mechanism, we just cannot judge it. So this is the first reason why the engagement is important. And to show you that importance, here you can see part of debaters and judges briefing from the World Schools Debating Championships from a year ago. And here you can see for what do you get points in the school style. And 20% of that points is from the strategy, and 40% of our speakers' points are from the content. And see that in each of this category, the engagement is really highlighted. Like I highlighted it for the purpose of today's workshop. However, in both of those parts, in strategy and in content, you are judged based on your engagement. So the strategy is kind of tied to good engagement, but also content does cover not only arguments that we usually think of when we hear the word content, but content also means all the rebuttals, your POIs, and your responses to POIs. And if your rebuttal is weak or is poorly developed, then the content also is weaker. So that is why we should care not only about our arguments, but also about our engagement with other side, because you are judged based on it, and you are going to get lower speaker points if your engagement will be less, if it will be weaker, or if it will be underdeveloped. So now that we know what is engagement, we know why we should be engaging with the other side, because we want to convince the judge that we won, but also because you probably want to get higher speaker points. Let's move on to the most important things, so how to actually engage with the other side. Starting with the direct rebuttal, as this is something that you will probably spend most time on during the debate. When it comes to engagement, of course, probably most of your engagement is going to be through direct rebuttal. There is a very easy way to rebut your arguments. It just takes 3 steps, and we are going to now, I'm going to explain you those 3 steps, and later on we'll apply it to a case study. We are going to rebut an argument together. So how to actually do the direct rebuttal? The easiest way to do it is to firstly find a logical gap in your opponent's argumentation. Logical gap means a moment within their argument when what they're saying isn't true, when there's something unexplained, when there's something that they assume is true, but it isn't explained, it isn't said out loud. So there's a logical gap, and we can benefit on that logical gap. Because if within the argument you have a space when something isn't explained, it means that the later part of the argument, which relies on that logical gap, is also less believable, is less probable. So first thing that we need to do is find a weakness in your opponent's argument. To find a weakness, to find a logical gap, to find a place where you feel like something isn't truly explained. And when you think about it, you think that it might be true what they are saying, but you also think that there might be other outcomes, that the situation might be looking a little bit differently, etc., etc. So the first thing, find this logical gap. When you find it while listening to your opponents, you have to write down your rebuttals. And later on, when you go to your speech, you have to show that logical gap to the judges. You have to name it. You have to say, dear judges, here's the logical gap in my opponent's argument. This is how it looks like. So you have to show how it looks like. Where is that logical gap? And somehow name it. Say that this is untrue. And lastly, it is not enough to say that your opponent's arguments have a weakness. You also have to say why it means that the rest of the argument is untrue. And this is the step number 3. So explaining why the logical gap makes the argument untrue. To sum up, we need to rebut the opponent's cases. We find a logical gap, then we show it to judges, say, hey, there's this logical gap. And at the end, we must explain why with this logical gap, the whole argument is untrue, is less probable, is less important within the debate. So to rebut, we have to engage more than just show that there's one mistake. Now let's do it on example, because I know that right now it might sound either a little bit too abstract or a little bit too easy. So let's see how we feel about this. Here's a case study. We have a motion, we have an argument, and firstly, I would like to ask you, where do you believe is the biggest logical gap within that argument? There might be many logical gaps in this argument as it's really, really short, but we are going to find the one that is the most important, by attacking which we can take down the whole argument, which is the most strategic to attack. So where do you think is a logical gap in this argument? I'll give you a second to read it. I'll just read the motion and check if you understand the motion, and if there are going to be any questions to the motion, I'll answer it. So the motion is, this House would create gender quotas in political parties, making it mandatory for each political party to have at least 50% of female members of parliament. So when any political party goes to parliament, 50% of their members must be females, so must be women. Are there any questions to the motion? Okay, there are no questions. So now a few seconds to read the argument, and then I'll ask you, where do you believe is the logical gap within that argument? Where should we attack it? Okay, I see that Martina raised your hand. So where do you believe is that logical gap?
I believe the logical gap is about choosing the voting list because it says that no political party could run for election without saying 40% of their seats, while
Okay.
the
Mhm.
voting process isn't explained, and like the voting list usually is built that people who get higher scores are getting the seats. So if the men will be on these higher scores on the list, they will get the seats.
Okay, that's one place when there's a gap. However, when you look at the motion, it means that it's kind of, I get what it's saying, but it's kind of explained because of the motion. Like the motion requires us to believe that somehow it is possible to have those 50% of female members in the parliament. However, it's true that you can rebut that, for example, it's hard to do it, or that in some cases there will be less of the women. However, as we'll learn later, it's a mitigation, it's not a full offensive rebuttal. However, yes, this is a place where there could be more explanation as to how is it possible to actually have those 50% of female members in the parliament. I just like to say that I'm so sorry, but here is a typo. It should be 50%, not 40%. So yes, you could do some of the rebuttals to say that there will be less women in the parliament. And however, the rest of the argument still stands. Even there will be less than 50%, then probably the rest of it will still happen if we don't rebut it. I saw that probably one more person raised their hand. If you could speak up and say, where do you find other logical gap?
I think it's about that because women would have about like 50% part in parliament that would lead to resolving issues of pay gaps and accessibility healthcare or discrimination in workplaces, because it's not about the gender, it's about the political plan.
Great. So as we see, the logical gap, one more person joined in. Just to quickly say, we are actually doing the rebuttals right now. So yes, it is true that just because we have more women in the parliament, it doesn't mean that we resolve all those issues, right? So there's a logical gap between saying we have more women in the parliament and then saying those more women will do pro-women policies, let's call it like that. So the logical gap would be somewhere here in that sentence. With more female parliament members, we would get more pro-women policies, as women would create such laws and vote for them. There's a logical gap because there's nowhere, we lack the explanation as why would women create such laws and why would women generally vote for them. Nina, I believe, already told us that, for example, it might be due to their other political beliefs than their gender. Do you have any other ideas why women who would get to the parliament because of those quotas wouldn't vote or wouldn't create pro-women policies? Do you have any other ideas why it isn't true? Okay. I don't see any. Oh, I see an idea. Yeah, I hear you.
Maybe when the places in parliament would be guaranteed by the voting guidelines, the women in the parliament could be branded as those who got in just because it is necessary to have women in your political party and not because they deserve it. And it could result in maybe bad treatment of female members of the parliament, but also not all women share the same political views. So it would make it impossible to create one cohesive version of a law that all women in the parliament would accept.
Great, awesome. So Anna just gave us two reasons. Firstly, just because you are in a parliament doesn't mean that you have power within the party. You might be treated differently just because you got there because of the quota. So it means that, for example, your ideas or laws wouldn't be backed up by your party, etc., etc. So that's the first reason why it might not be true. And the second reason, which was already also mentioned before, is that women are not like one cohesive body. They have different political views, and they might disagree on the healthcare. They might disagree on how to resolve or if the pay gaps even exist. They might disagree how the discrimination affects them and what should be resolved first, what shouldn't be even touched upon. So those are great reasons why this argument isn't true. So we found a logical gap. We found reasons why the whole argument isn't true. And with that rebuttals, this argument is way, way less probable than it was at the beginning. So let's move on. Here's one easiest way. For me, it's also always an easiest way. So I really like to teach it to other people because it helped me a lot. So an easiest way to explain why an argument isn't true, we've already kind of did it with that example. So when you find a logical gap, you can use this trick to show why it isn't true. The easiest way to rebut it is to show that there are other factors that influence a specific actor, which might be a person, a group, or an institution. Because within a debating, when we say actor of the debate, we mean like a person, group, or an institution. Because people are influenced by a lot of factors, by their own moral values, by their own practical interests that they want the best for themselves. It might be because of the expectations existing in the society that makes us able to do some things and scared to do the other things. We are influenced by the economic or knowledge blockades. Some people with more money can do more things. People generally with more knowledge can, again, do a little bit more than people with less knowledge. They can make better choices, etc. And usually when we have a debating motion usually changes only one of all of those things. Usually only one factor gets changed after the debating motions, which means that the other ones still affect the actor, and we can still say that these other factors has a greater effect on the actor in question. So we can explain that, yes, women, for example, share the same gender, but they're also affected, for example, by their political views, and thus they wouldn't vote the same. I'll show that on an example, so that will be a lot clearer. So here's the example. Once again, let's find a logical gap in that argument and later use that rebuttal that I just showed you a second ago. So find a logical gap and tell me why there are other factors that influence, in that case, it will be children. How we can, in other ways, achieve the goal that this argument is trying to say. Okay, I'll give you a second to read it. The motion is this House supports religious teaching to children. And we have an argument that religious beliefs are great at communicating core values to children and shaping their morals. Religions provide universal and easily applied stories through which you can graphically show the populace how they should act in order to be good people and not to hurt others. This is important in the busy world of parents. There will not always be time and opportunities to pass on to future citizens the key principles for friendly functioning in society. Okay, so who wants to rebut this case? Okay, I go on.
Sorry if you hear anything in the background, but it's like, in case I know that religions are like great, that they are showing what is good and what is bad, but what religion should this be? Because the religions can be really different, and there could be, for example, countries and societies where some religions would be a great example of how to live and how to be a good person, and for example, people, it would be very like not okay with this. They would be not okay with that religion that the teachers are teaching to children, and I think that there would be a lot of people who are like against it because they prefer different religion, and it would be difficult for everyone to like get for teacher to teach the children religion that their parents would love them to be taught.
Okay, I get it. It is a part of rebuttal that yes, we would have to somehow adjust the religion to the parents. But let's assume for a second that this is possible to adjust the religion to the parents, and let's rebut it by the way that I've just shown that you can show that there are other factors which can influence people, in that case, children. And I see that Anna raised her hand, their hand.
I think the most important logical gap in this argument is that religion is not the only medium by which you can pass down the moral values to the children. There are also other ways to teach the good values to and ethics, moral ethics of the society to young members of society without using the religious context. And I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, and can you say how in other way can we teach children the moral values?
Okay, so I don't know, maybe maybe some stories from history are a great realistic example of how morals work and what is good to do and what is wrong.
Great. Does anybody else have other ways that we can teach children moral values?
We can teach them about philosophy, where we have like the semantics of building relationships, how to connect with people, what is good, what is bad, not only religion, but there is also philosophy.
Okay.
Also,
Cool. Mhm.
we have some laws that simply we can like learn and how they affect us. So like actively studying the law that is used in our country or in the globe, like basic rights, human rights.
Great, cool. Does anybody else have other ways that we can teach children moral values?
I mean, it's not maybe, it depends what age the children are, but I think that fairy tales are already some kind of way of teaching children what is bad and what is the good. And that, for example, bad is not, that being bad is not very like, it always bites you back at the end, and that being good gives you more, for example, opportunities to get something good back.
Great, that's awesome. A great example. Probably when children are like, for example, 4 or 5, they wouldn't get the philosophy, but they might get the fairy tales. When they grow up a little bit, they might get the philosophy. Okay, so we have some ideas how differently we can teach children about the moral values. And now let's do the second step. So why those other ways are even better than teaching through religion? For example, why the fairy tales might be better to teach moral values than the religion?
May I?
Okay, 2 people want to
Go
speak
first.
Okay, cool.
Okay, thank you. Is that, for example, if you want to explain someone what is good and what is bad by using like religion, is, for example, by using Christianity, I think it's that you would have to tell the child like that Jesus was like, I don't know how to explain it, but for example, that if you are teaching religion, you are also not only telling that what is good, what is bad, and why you have to like show examples. And for example, I don't think that for 5 years olds, for example, it would be good to, for example, tell them about how Jesus was killed on a cross, I believe. But it would be, for example, better to tell about, I don't know, like one of the Disney princesses or whatever.
Okay, cool. So for example, the fairy tales are usually less graphic than religious stories. So it's easier to show it to children, to not scare them off. And thus it's just easier to install those moral values and to make them interested in a topic and to watch it till the end, etc., etc. Cool. Martina has an idea.
My idea is that religious stories, yes, are based almost on metaphor. So children don't understand metaphors, while in the fairy tales or in the novels, we have real characters or characters that we can associate us with them as the children. So we would like to just do what they do. We understand the lesson from it, and it's easier presented to interpretation for children than these metaphors in religious stories. Bible,
Great.
for example.
Great. Again, it's just easier to understand a simple story about a princess than very complex metaphors that we sometimes have in religious teaching. So it's even easier to pass that moral values. And last person, Martina also raised a hand.
Okay, I have idea that religions aren't as objective as the other ways of explaining something to children.
Okay. Okay, cool. Again, it would require a little bit of explanation why fairy tales are more objective, but it's again a good idea to rebut it. And by this way, we can show that we can teach the moral values different way, we can achieve the same goal different way, because there are different factors which can influence children's understanding of morals. Probably win a debate, we would have to also have our own arguments showing the harms of religious teaching. However, this is a way to deal with that argument. Cool. So now let's get to the third case study. It's a little bit longer, and here, once again, you can use there are other factor type of rebuttal. You can use all the types of rebuttal here that you want. It's just a type of to kind of sum it up. So we have the motion that this house would legalize all the drugs. We have argument against it. So imagine that somebody's on the opposition and they say, this will increase the number of addicts. As a result of legalizing drugs, it is natural that more people will come into contact with them. Since consumption of drugs will not be illegal, the natural fear of doing so will disappear. If more people try drugs, the total number of those who became addicted will also increase, especially if we are talking about those substances that are highly addictive, like heroin. As a result, social costs will increase and the state will have to spend more money on helping these people, and at the same time, many families and relationships will be in danger when people become dependent on psychoactive substances. So firstly, let's find a logical gap that is the biggest and most important gap in this argument. Do you have any idea? Okay, I see a hand raised.
That like if you make something illegal, that doesn't make people like be feared of it, but more likely it's, for example, I think the best example is teenagers here, because when hormones are working, some of them are like rebellious and they want to do something illegal to just feel cool or whatever. I don't know, but if something feels illegal, then it's giving us adrenaline to do it. So first of all, and second of all, make it illegal just makes it harder to get, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible or like it doesn't solve the problem, because people would still be able to get it, and like people who are rebellious would still do it.
Okay, so I get your point. What you're saying is that just because something is illegal doesn't mean you are scared of it, right?
I mean, in some way, I mean, like, for example, we are shown a very of like when something is illegal, it just is, you just know that it's going to be, if someone catches you doing this, you are going to be in trouble. It means that you are doing something illegal. Like, for example, stealing. It's not like I'm afraid of stealing, but if someone catches me stealing, then I am going to be in trouble. This is what I think can be meant by
illegal. Cool. So I think that what you just said is very close to what I think is the biggest logical gap in the debate. And I see that two more people raise their hands. So let's tie it down to one logical gap. And we have Martyna and Anna. I don't know who was, Martyna was first and then the Anna. So Martyna.
The logical gap I found is that we already have in the shops substances that as much as addictive as drugs. So we have already prepared ways to control the selling of these highly addictive substances. So why not apply this into selling drugs?
Okay, but this is the motion. The motion says we would legalize all drugs, and the opposition agrees that yes, it is possible to legalize selling drugs. We can use those measurements that we just talked about, that we use with saying alcohol or I don't know, cigarettes, etc. So the opposition says yes, you can do that. It is possible. However, it would be bad because more people would become addicts. And I see that also Anna also raised their hand. So Anna, go on.
Yes, so I think there is a logical gap between in the statement that the state will have to spend more money on helping people addicted. So when state comes in and controls the drugs, the alcohol, there are necessary measures to control the quality of the drugs. So maybe they will be more safe for people to use and won't have the most harmful negative effects.
Okay, that again it's cool. You can say that they will be safer. However, it doesn't rebut the part that people will become addicts, as even if something is safe, for example, sugar is very safe, but it is highly addictive, coffee the same. So the argument about addiction still stays the same. Okay, so coming back to the first person who was talking.
Sorry, it's just I'm thinking that when, for example, we have like things, when things are legalized, then people are like, it's not something illegal to, like, for example, let's say with alcohol, it's like, let's say it's addictive, like, it's very highly addictive, but it's not illegal for people who are after 18 years old. It's completely okay to do this. I mean, they can drink if they want to, but the thing is that not every single person who ever had a drink is going to be addicted, because people have like self-control, most of them, and self-control, if something would be legalized, it would be, people would still feel like control, because they would be, for example, taught about this, they would know what is in it, because they, like someone before me said, I don't remember your name, sorry, that if it would be safer because it would be controlled somehow and you would know what is in it. For example, you could like know or how much you want to take or can take. If you don't want to get addicted or something like that, you could control it and it could be safer because you could actually control it. Like,
cool.
I don't
Okay,
know
so
if you
now
could-
all together with all the ideas, it is true that yes, we can, for example, even if something is legal, it doesn't mean that we start to overuse it. The example with alcohol is great. Alcohol is highly addictive. It can have really bad consequences for the families, for the relationships. However, majority of people don't have that problems with alcohol, and that is because there are other reasons than something being legal that makes us use it or not use it. Just because something is legal doesn't mean that we start overuse it. So, and you are all right. You are all right that there are also different logical gaps. However, the one that I wanted to focus on is the one that you just like all together said about, but in different ways. So if you look at this argument, there's the sentence that since consumption of drugs will not be illegal, the natural fear of doing so will disappear. There's an assumption that just because something is illegal, that means we fear it. It is not explained how with something becoming legal, people stop fear to use it. Do you have any reasons other than what was just said, that people have self-control, why people wouldn't like to overuse the drugs or would be still scared to use the drugs? Why people might not want to do that?
We have some beliefs
Okay.
that simply we agree with. Like there are some religion beliefs that don't allow us to eat some kind of meat, and don't allow us to harm ourselves, and drugs are doing that.
Okay, cool. So we have the religious values that tell us that we cannot take drugs. Excellent. We have Anna also with a hand raised.
So maybe if the drugs will be just like, I don't know, for example, cigarettes, when a person buys a pack of cigarettes, there are some scary images that are supposed to educate the person buying them about the consequence of buying this drug. So maybe the people would be more aware of the consequences of overusing the thing they're buying.
Okay, cool. So once again, people probably know that, for example, taking a lot of drugs means that they can get really hurt, and thus they would be scared to do that. Great. And one more hand that is raised there.
Yeah, it's that like, who wants to be addicted from like just because? There is no, I don't know any person who would like to be addicted just because they want it. There is like no logical reason for wanting to be addicted, and that every person, like again with alcohol, people are like controlling themselves because they know it's more healthy for them, and that would be like they are trying to have fun, but having fun in controlled way is healthy way could be like stopping them from overusing it, because they know what like someone before me said, like putting those scary images on the packs of cigarettes, they would know what are the consequences, and they would know that, for example, if you would choose, for example, alcohol over doing your job, that would have negative consequences. And I think that I think that drugs are similar here to alcohol, that no matter that everything is about control and our ability of like choosing what we would like, a safe future or having a good moment.
Cool. So once again, self-control. In this argument, again, all the rebuttals are great that you just said. We must be able to rebut the fact that we'll even try the drugs. If you are able to say why not significantly more people would like to try the drugs, then we can take down the whole argument. So if we combine all the reasons that you said, for example, the fear of getting sick, getting ill, the same way as it goes with the cigarettes and those drastic images on the packs, when it comes to moral values, for example, the religious values, when it comes to kind of self-control, and again, knowing the bad consequences of drugs, if we are able to explain that it is not true that more people would even try the drugs, then the rest of the argument just falls down and isn't true. And here is also like one thing to note when we talk about the rebuttals is when to try to find logical gaps. Usually, the earlier in the argument, the more destructive your rebuttal will be, which means that if you are only going to, for example, rebut the social costs that increase, you still have more people who are addicted, and that is probably still bad. But if you are able to prove why not more people will be addicted, then you are also rebutting the rest of the argument. So when you're looking for the logical gap, the best is usually to just find the logical gap that makes the whole argument dependent on it. In that case, the place where the whole argument was dependent on was the place when somebody was explaining why with drugs being not illegal, so with drugs being legal, why more people would try it. And then all the other arguments were based on more people trying, more people getting addicted. But it's great you all do the excellent job. And that was just one thing to note when you think about where do you want to target your argument, where do you want to rebut it. Okay, do you have any questions so far to those case studies that we just did? Okay, no, cool. Then now we are going to go to something which is a bit more theoretical. It might look weird or scary at the beginning, but don't worry, I'll explain everything. So here's something that I named 3 types of rebuttal, because there are different ways at which you can approach an argument when you try to rebut it and when you try to show that something isn't true. The first one is the defensive type of rebuttal. It is something that we've just practiced a little bit. Defensive argument means that you're just showing that there is something, maybe I have something in the background, doesn't matter. So when you have the defensive type of rebuttal, it means that you take an argument and you say, it's not entirely true. So let's take for an example, the argument that we will have in this motion of abolishing grades. Let's imagine that we have a motion this House would abolish grading system in schools. The opposition comes in and says, we can't abolish the grading system in schools because of that students would learn less. Students will learn less because they wouldn't fear that now they can get a bad grade from an exam, from a test, and without that fear, they wouldn't feel motivation to study hard and to learn a lot. So the defensive type of rebuttal would be coming in and saying, it is not true because students are studying not only because they fear bad grades, but also because they want to do good and then that they want to know more things, they want to develop themselves at school. What happens by this rebuttal is that the argument we just had affects a little bit smaller group. So this argument now doesn't affect people who are self-motivated and who want to develop themselves within the schools, who want to study hard just because they're interested in the topic. However, this argument is still true for some of the people. Still, some of the people will not learn when there are no grades because they will have, I don't know, better things to do, etc. And they wouldn't be scared of getting a bad grade, and thus they will be just less motivated to study. So when we imagine arguments as building something, as building, I don't know, a home, as building a block, the defensive rebuttal just takes only a little bit from the top. The argument still stands, however, it's smaller. And at the end of the debate, when we imagine it like that, the judge looks at your argument and it's just smaller after the defensive rebuttal. We just say that something isn't completely true. It just isn't 100% as the other side said. It might be, for example, only 60%. It might be only 40%. It might be only, I don't know, 20%. So it's way, way smaller. And then it's easier to win when you convince the judges that the argument that somebody said is just smaller. It's not so big. It doesn't affect such a big group. So this is the first type of rebuttal, the defensive one. Then we have the second one, which is an offensive argument, offensive type of rebuttal. And it's different from the defensive because we say not only that their argument isn't true, but also that in the reality it goes the opposite way. So, for example, when we take this argument that if we abolish grading system in schools, the student will study less, offensive rebuttal will have to show that not only is it not true that students would study less, but also show that students would study even more without the grades. So how you could do it? You could, for example, try to explain all the things that we had at the beginning of the presentation, that the grades are only stressful for students, they are frustrating, and they are really frustrating because they don't reflect on students' progress. Students believe that they are really arbitrary and they don't feel any sense in studying for those grades. They sometimes might feel, because of all of that factors, that they are not in the control of their own grades. So having a grading system only makes them less likely to study because they are too stressed, they don't feel good about school, and they are not motivated because they are frustrated with how the grades don't reflect on their own progress. However, if we abolish the grading system, they will be more motivated to learn, as they will now feel that they do it just for themselves. There will be less pressure on themselves and less stress, which means that when we have less pressure, when we have less stress on students, they are more likely to engage within the school system, because now they think about the schools even better, and that will mean that they will be more likely to study even more just because they will like the school more. This was maybe not the excellent offensive rebuttal. However, what I was trying to show you is that with the offensive rebuttal, we are not only making the argument of our opponents smaller, but we also kind of make an opposite argument that goes the other way. It is stronger than the defensive rebuttals because it leaves your opponents with nothing, and it even builds something on your own side. So not only judges at the end of the debate think, that argument was not existent, they also are more convinced to your side because you are able to build something on your side as well. And this is that like graphic example how it would look like if we think about arguments like about blocks of content. That we just take an argument, we make it disappear, and then we also say why it goes the other way. And then we have the third type of dealing with arguments, which is the even if approach. So when we are using the even if approach, we are saying their argument might be true. We don't have any problem with that. However, we believe that results are opposite to what they are saying. So in the example with the grading system, someone might say, okay, it's true that without the grade, students will study less. We agree with that. However, we believe that studying less is not something bad. It's actually something really good. We believe that when students study less, they have more time for themselves, they can relax, they can enjoy their time with their families. When they learn less, they can actually spend time on what they are interested in, and they can develop themselves in the ways that are more suitable for them than just studying for all the exams. It is way better for the overall personal development. We want the world in which students study this. We think that it's a good job. And look how smart it is. You don't have to rebut the whole argument of your opponents. You can agree with it. You can say that it's true. However, you still hold that argument on your side of the debate without even rebutting it. Why is it so cool? It is so cool because usually majority of the arguments are somewhat true. Because you're on a good level of debating, because majority of the arguments are quite intuitive on both sides of the house, because the motions are even on both sides of the house, because the CAs always try to do it even and fair. So this is really smart because you don't have to rebut something that might be true, that might be intuitively good, etc., etc. You are just taking the results and say, look, it is bad. So you don't have to convince the judge that their argument isn't true. You are only saying that the results are bad, that we don't want it. And now you might ask, okay, Marianna, so which type of rebuttal should I do? Like, should I always do the even if, as it's so cool and so smart? Or should I always do offensive, as it's definitely stronger than defensive? The answer is, it really depends. It really depends on the debate. It really depends on which speaking person in the debate you are. And it really depends on, I don't know, what ideas you have in your head. You cannot always think of all the offensive, even if or defensive rebuttals. However, usually when you have time in a debate, it's smart to do all the ways of the rebuttal. So it is really smart to do the defensive, to do the offensive, and to the even if. Because all of them secure you from the fact that, for example, judge wouldn't believe you're offensive or wouldn't believe you're even if is a safe way if you are scared that judge wouldn't believe the defensive and offensive. So especially if you're a third speakers in the school style, I would strongly recommend you to try to make your rebuttal structured in a way that you firstly use the defensive type of rebuttal. So you say, it isn't completely true. Here are the reasons why. Then you can do the offensive rebuttal. So tell that their arguments are not only true, but the reality is the opposite. And then at the end, you can say, even if you don't buy any of my rebuttals, even if you still think that my opponent's arguments are true, they still shouldn't win because the impacts are bad, because the results are bad, etc., etc. Secondly, note how those type of rebuttal differ when it comes to time consumption. When you want to do the defensive rebuttal, you only need a small amount of time to say that this part here is not true. You only need to spend on, I don't know, like 30 seconds, like a minute to just say that this part of an argument isn't true. It's really easy. We've just practiced it and you are able to within 15 seconds tell me that this argument isn't true because here's a logical gap. Here are the other factors that influence it. For example, it isn't true that all women will vote on the pro-women policies because they have different political views, they might be conservative. And secondly, because they are in the parliament, it doesn't mean that they will have power. Likely they will not have any power when they go to parliament just because of the quotas. 50 seconds and done, you have a defensive rebuttal. So it's really useful when you don't have much time to spend on that argument. Because there will be many arguments in a debate, you won't have a lot of time, like hours, to rebut every single one of them. So when an argument is a bit weaker, or when you don't have much time, or when you are, for example, first or second speaker and you have your own content that you must run, you can use a defensive type of rebuttal because it just takes you less time to explain to judges why something is just a little bit less true, and it's still useful within the debate. Then, when it comes to the offensive and to the even if, it usually takes more time to explain it. So, for example, it takes more time to explain why not only something isn't true, but also why the reality goes the other way. It again takes more time to explain why something which firstly was explained as a good thing is actually bad, or something that was explained as a bad thing is actually good. So, when you think about time, you might want to use the defensive ones when you have less of the time. You might want to use the offensive, and even if when you, for example, have a little bit more time, or when you want to rebut something a bit stronger, then you might want to use those two. Are there any questions to those type of rebuttals?
So in the third type, we are focusing on effects of the change. Like
Yes.
what in this world, for example, of the government change would cause, like negative effects of this change?
Yes, exactly. Yes, we want to say that, okay. Yes, what you are saying is true, but the impacts, they are different. What changes is different. We think about it different, we interpret it in a different way. Yes, totally. Are there any other questions to that part? Okay, I don't see any more questions. We'll do the sum up and we will move on to the next part. I will continue the presentation. So I just needed to check the time. Okay, so now a quick sum up of the rebuttals. Look for the logical gap. That is the first one. and look for the logical gaps that are the most important and crucial for the argument, because once you rebut it, the whole argument might be down. Secondly, explain why argument isn't true. You not only have to point out the logical gap, you also must benefit on it, explain why it's not true, why it goes the other way, why even if, etc., etc. For example, here's the example of that easy way out. You can say that other factors have the influence on what we are talking about. And lastly, that's like a new thing for that sum up. Remember that just because somebody can do something doesn't mean that they will. Just because students can learn a lot doesn't mean that they study. Just because, I don't know, the state could give all of us extra money doesn't mean that the state will. Just because just because teachers can give us all 5 doesn't mean they will. So we must remember that just because somebody can do something doesn't mean that they will. And you should always watch out for your opponent's arguments. And when they explain that something is possible, that somebody possibly could do something, it doesn't mean that this actor would actually do it. And secondly, there's an opposite way. Just because somebody really wants to do something doesn't mean that they can. Because there are different factors that influence them. For example, I might really want to, I don't know, buy myself a flat in Warsaw. However, it doesn't mean that I can because I don't have the money. And once again, point it out to your opponents that even if they will be able to explain that somebody is motivated to do something, doesn't mean that this person can do it because, for example, they don't have time, don't have money, don't have the knowledge, don't have the space, don't have the support, etc., etc. So this is a sum up of the rebuttal. That presentation will be shared with you, so you will be able to come back to it. And now we are moving on to the weighing. So weighing and how to do it. Weighing is different from the rebuttal, is the closest to the even if probably, because within the weighing, we usually do not rebut our opponent's arguments. We just take our arguments, we take opponent's arguments, and we try to explain to the judges why ours are more important and why the other side is less important within that debate, why they should lose. And here is the easiest structure how to do weighing. And now let's go through it. Firstly, when you do the weighing, flag it, which means say that you are going to do the weighing. It sounds very silly, but it's very important to win the debate, inform the judges that currently you do the weighing. Otherwise, the judges might miss it, might not note it, and it might go really it might not get noted in the debate. It just might not be later on used while judging the debate. So make sure that you clearly say to judges, dear panel, now let's weigh those both arguments. They know what you are doing and they are not going to miss on your weighing. Secondly, make sure you must choose the metric on which you are going to compare the arguments. In a second, we'll talk about different metrics of weighing, different ways to compare your arguments. However, make sure that you choose the metric on which you are comparing both arguments, and that again you say it out loud to judges that now I'm going to compare how big are the impacts, or now I'm going to compare which argument is more probable. Say to the judges once again that they know how do you weight, and once again, it makes you really focused on actually proving on that metric where you are winning. So you are not going to later forget about it, do some different weighing, etc. So flag it, say that you are going to do the weighing, choose a metric on which you are going to weigh two arguments, and say it out loud to judges. Then say why your opponents are bad on this metric. So for example, explain why they are talking about a very small group, or why their impacts are very, very shallow, etc., etc. So when you explain that the opposition arguments, even if they are true, then their impacts are not good, or they are not within the motion. And at the end, once again, this is also crucial, like everything in the weighing is crucial, but this is really important. Say why your own arguments are better on that metric. So when you do the weighing, which is different than rebuttal, you not only are saying that the arguments of the other side are not so perfect, but you also must explain why yours are better. And this is the key difference between weighing and rebuttal. That on the rebuttal, we focus on the arguments of your opponents. You only rebut your opponent's arguments. But when we do the weighing, we must compare our opponent's arguments to our own arguments. So we must explain why the arguments of our opponents are not perfect on that given metric, why they are not the best on that metric, and then say why we on this metric are beating them, why we are winning. And here you have metrics of weighing. There are tons and thousands, there are like thousands of ways to weigh two arguments to compare them. So here we have three and some more within the third one that I found the most common ones, the ones that are the easiest, the ones that are the most useful within the debates. The first one is fulfilling the burden of proof. Are the arguments correct in the given motion? Are the arguments specific and linked to the motion? So for example, when we have a debate that this house believes that, I don't know, that students should learn for 5 hours a day, there's a completely different debate from this house as a student would learn that much. So you must check each argument whether they're actually in the correct debate. You have to check that, for example, in this house regrets debate, is this argument made about some bad things that happened in the past that we already can regret? And is within that argument an explanation why in the alternative world it would be better? When we have this house as somebody debate, you should check whether your opponent's arguments are actually from the perspective of a given actor. And if they are not from a perspective of an actor, if they're objective, you can weigh the arguments and say, look, dear panel, our arguments fulfill the burden of proof. They are within the motion. Arguments of our opponents are the wrong motion, so they are less important and should not win this debate. This one is very powerful. However, you are only able to use it when your opponents like really miss out on the topic and are like really lost. Then you can use it. So it's not so often, but it's very powerful. Second one is probability of arguments. So here you kind of bring in some rebuttals, but it's the moment when you say, look, dear panel, our arguments are more probable and thus you should choose them over our opponent's arguments. In that case, we are just showing why your arguments are more intuitive, are happening in more scenarios, why your arguments were rebutted less within that debate, and why the arguments of your opponents were either really rebutted within that debate, or why intuitively they are not so common, and why they do not apply to all the scenarios, why they are really less probable than your arguments. And then the third way of weighing is comparing the impacts of the argument that we are talking about. And here are very different ways of comparing the impacts of the both sides. The first one is the scaling. So which argument impacts a bigger group of people? When you say that 100 people will get extra $10 versus one person will get extra $10, all of us would vote for the side on which 100 people get $10. It's a very simple way to put it, but it shows you that the bigger group, the better. If the argument influences more people, then it's just stronger. Second way of weighing is the depth of the impact. So that our argument impacts people stronger. For example, if we would have one person and that one person would be able to give millions of dollars versus we would give 100 of people just $10, we would all vote for the side that gives $1 million to one person because the depth is bigger, because the impact is way stronger. Then the third way to weigh those arguments is on the vulnerability. So our argument impacts more vulnerable groups. When we have on both sides the same amount of people, the depth of impact is the same, then we can look at the vulnerability. Within our society, we have some special groups towards which we usually have some type of obligation, or groups who are already unfair or unjustly treated. Those groups are usually different types of minorities. Those are also people who are really vulnerable. So for example, children or people who are, I don't know, really old and need to be taken care of, etc. Then we can say that towards those people, we have bigger obligation. We should prioritize them as they are already unfairly treated. They were harmed by the state, or they are really dependent on the other people. So we should prioritize them. Then the fourth way of weighing is on the irreversibility. So the impact that cannot be undone. For example, if somebody is going to get their wallet stolen, they can still earn back this money. But for example, if somebody is going to lose a leg, they're not going to grow it back. So there are some type of impacts that are really hard to later make up for them. If you, for example, devastate the environment, it may be really hard to take care of it later. But if a company loses some money on the pro-ecological technology, it can still earn it later back. So the impact is less severe, it is just irreversible. It's just reversible, the company can get the money back. And lastly, last way of comparing is long-term versus short-term. We can say that some impacts are more important because they are going to influence people for next 100 years, 50 years, next 5 years. So it's more important that something is only going to happen for a couple of months. Because then the impact is also stronger when it happens, when it lasts for a longer period of time. However, we can also say that we should prioritize the short-term arguments because they are more probable. It's easier to predict what's going to happen within the next couple of months than create an argument that is going to be probable and is going to work for the next 50 years. So these are these ways of weighing. Do you have any questions to that? Okay, I don't see any questions. Again, right now that might be a little.
I have a question.
Okay, cool. Go with the question.
About weighting.
Mhm.
Can we apply like some of these ways of weighting into like weighting the general idea of the world that we are presenting, like the status quo and the world that they prove as a model of the solution to the problem?
Yes, we
I don't
can.
really-
Could you give an example? That would be a little bit easier.
I'm thinking maybe about this world with grades, like they present a solution how like students would be like in one world we have students that are simply learning and they are creating a new way of the new way that students can actually graduate school based on something.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we are like having the world that we say that no, we should have grades, like simply we are basing our whole school system of graduation on grades. And like they can present the world one as like the opposition would present like the world now as a better, well-developed, where organized and so on. While the opposition would present that it is unfair, it is disorganized. Can we apply some of these metrics of weighting into that? Like just comparing model to status quo?
I believe that usually when you compare a model to status quo, you either want to show that it's insufficient, that it's not going to work out well, then you're just doing the rebuttal. Usually I believe it's not useful in the debate to compare our world just to the model. It's way more useful to compare that to the impacts of the model. So I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. I believe that yes, you probably can somehow do it, but I just don't believe that it is really useful. I believe that it is way more useful to either show that the model is completely wrong, insufficient, it's not going to be effective in implementing that change. I think that's way more useful than comparing the model to the status quo. And secondly, I just believe it's more useful to compare the impacts of the model to the impacts of your site. But can you do it? Yes, you can. It's just in my head, if I understood you correctly, it's just not going to be really, really useful. Okay, is that does it make it clearer?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool, great. Are there any other questions? No, I don't see any more questions. Okay, so I'm going to pause this presentation, and here you have a homework weighing. Weighing the homework, if you want to do it, of course, it's like not a homework, but if you want to practice weighing, we don't have time to do it right now. Here are 4 arguments within a debate, and the homework is to try to weigh each argument with all the other arguments, or just choose one argument and try to weigh it with all the others, or you can do all the arguments with all the others. However, here the arguments are created in such a way that each of these arguments is winning and losing on one of the metrics, so it should be easy for you to find ways to weigh them. Once it's published, you can just before the Polish School Debating Championships, you can just take it and practice the weighing before, and just check whether you are able to do it. When you are going to do it, just remember to use that structure. So remember that when you practice weighing, first you write to yourself, okay, now it's the weighing, then write on which metric you are weighing, and then say why the other argument is not good on that metric, and then show why your own is really, really good. So that you can do at home. You can, I don't know, quickly do a print screen or something to have it. And we're moving on because we don't have that much time. So at the end, engagement, who should do it? Basic answer, everyone within the debate should be engaging with the other side. And now, once again, I'm going to rush a little bit, so I'm not going to ask you a question, I'm going to already show you the answer. And this is also going to answer the question from the beginning of the presentation, who should do which type of engagement on which speeches in the school style. So here it is shown that when you look at the speeches, in the school style debating, you basically can do whatever you want to. However, some things are more strategic than the others on different speeches. Starting with the Prime Minister, for example, usually cannot rebut or rebuild the arguments because there were no other speeches in the debate so far. So usually the only way the Prime Minister within a debate can engage is through the POIs. The Prime Minister can take POIs. Prime Minister can also later within the debate ask POIs to the other side. And this is going to be the crucial way that Prime Minister is going to engage, because it's really hard to rebut something that wasn't already within the debate. Then we move to the leader of the opposition. And here is the key difference between the Oxford style debating that some of you might know and the school style debating that the Polish School Debating Championships is in. The first speaker of the opposition can already rebut the arguments of the other side, whereas more, the leader of the opposition is already expected to do it at least a little bit. So of course, the main focus should be on the content. The 90% of your speech should be your content, your speech, your case. However, it is expected that you already start rebutting what was in that debate, so that you already start rebutting Prime Minister, that you, for example, rebut the one main idea, that you give a little bit of a defensive rebuttal, something that shows that you are already engaging, because it already makes the argument of the Prime Minister weaker. So the side proposition starts to lose in the comparison to your case that is not rebutted. And also it makes the job of Deputy Prime Minister harder, as they will have to rebuild the argument, which now I'm moving into. I'm going to explain those stars in a second, weighing with a star. So then we have the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Things that they can do are the same. On both sides of the House, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition can ask POIs and offer POIs and take POIs. And the deputies can also rebuild the case of their side. So, for example, when you're the Deputy Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition has just rebutted the Prime Minister case, it's your job to rebuild it. So after the leader of the opposition, for example, said, look, that argument isn't true because the reason why women choose the prominent politics are different, like they might have different political views, or they won't be treated seriously within the parliament, then it's the job of the Deputy Prime Minister to say, look, we believe that still majority of women would vote for those politics. And then they can start making mechanism as to why majority of women somehow feel connected, how they experience on daily basis that discrimination, and so they want to do something about it, how once they are in the parliament, they don't really need the, they can do things on their own, they don't need the approval of the party, etc. So first thing that you do is rebuilding. You want to rebuild your case so that it stands again on its own. You can do the same thing on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Secondly, you want to rebut your opponent's cases. You want to show why it isn't true. And you can the same do it on the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to tell why those two arguments weren't true. And of course, you should bring in your case. You should bring your own constructive. So once again, your main focus is probably going to be on your constructive case, on your own analysis. However, you should engage with the other side. You should both rebuild your arguments and you should rebut the arguments of the other side. And now I explain why the weighing is with a star. It is because weighing is always a good idea. Whenever you can do it, just do it. However, from my experience in the school style debating, I see that usually speakers don't have that much time to do all those stuff and additionally bring their own constructive. Usually when you don't have that much time, you usually should focus on rebuilding and rebutting, as whips and replies are going to do the weighing for you. So if you can do the weighing, it's great, do it, add it to your speech, but usually you just don't have that much time. Then we have the whip speeches, and whip speeches are basically engagement speeches. Those are the speeches that are based on engagement, they're full of engagements, so we can ask POIs and take POIs. They can rebuild, and they should rebuild the arguments after the rebuttal from the other side. They should heavily focus on the rebuttal. Probably majority of the whip speech is going to be rebuttal, and they also should try to include weighing into their speeches. So within the whip speeches, after you rebut the case of your opponent, at the end you should weigh. So you should say, okay, after this rebuttal, you already know that this argument isn't true, but now let's compare it to our arguments, and then you do the weighing. And then we have the reply speeches, which are those last speeches. On the reply speeches, you cannot take any POIs. You have the protected whole 4 minutes, but you can, and you should focus on weighing. That's why it's in a bold letters, because on the reply speeches, they are all about weighing, so convincing the judges that you won. So to use the time on the reply speeches strategically, you should focus on the weighing, not summarizing the debate that just happened. So rather than repeating the speeches, the cases of both sides, try to already compare so the judge knows why you are winning the debate. On the reply speeches, you can also do the rebuilding or the rebuttal. However, you probably will have less time on that. There are only 4 minutes, so probably you should focus way more on the weighing. And there are, okay, I have 5 more minutes. Okay, so there are 2 bottom lines from that slide. The first one is that everybody should engage. I strongly encourage you to do the engagement. You then come, then your speeches are just stronger. You are stronger within the debate when all of your speakers engage in the way that they can and that they have time for. Secondly, especially for the speakers that are less experienced within the debates, especially the school style, from my experience, I see that sometimes it's hard for you to speak for the whole 8 minutes. For example, on the prime minister or the deputy prime minister, especially on the impromptu rounds, it sometimes happens that you just don't have that much material. Your own constructive case is just shorter than those 8 minutes. And although I strongly recommend to try to deepen your analysis and find additional ways of why something is true, why something is important, remember that engagement is always an easy way out to make your speech last longer, because usually it's very easy to explain why somebody is wrong. Usually it's really easy to spot mistakes among speeches of people who are on a very similar level to us, because nobody's perfect. So if you are scared that you are not going to speak for the whole 8 minutes, remember that you can engage with the other side. It's very good strategically. It's good for your speaker points. It's good for the debate as a whole. And you can also fill in the time that you don't have within the school style if you are a beginner person or a person who is new to school styles, and sometimes it's just scary and hard to speak for the whole 8 minutes long. Lastly, about when to do engagement. Here you have what you can do on different speeches. Usually, it is advised or it is done in a way that on the leader of the opposition and on the deputy speeches, usually engagement goes first. So usually you rebut the arguments of your opponents first and later on do your own constructives. This is how it's usually done. There are different ways of justification for it. For example, that when you rebut at the beginning of your speech, you very clearly remember what was said and it's easier for you to engage. You are not going to miss out on anything. Sometimes he said that after you rebut your opponent's case and then you bring your own constructive, it looks stronger than if you would firstly bring your own constructive and judge will be still comparing it to the not rebutted argument. It looks stronger when you first rebut the argument, then you bring your own, then your constructive seem better. However, I heard that some people prefer to do it in the other way. For me, it would be really, really hard. So if you don't have the structure of your speech yet, I would advise you to first rebuild, rebut, and then bring in your own constructive. Okay, do you guys have any questions?
I have a question. What about the save time for POIs? For POIs, it's 15 seconds. Yeah?
Yes, it's 15 seconds for a POI, and you can ask a POI after first minute of a speech. Before the 7th minute of a speech, there are 5 minutes, 6 minutes when you can ask POIs. They should last for 15 seconds. Yes, that's true. Do you have any other questions? Is something not clear? Maybe it can be the whole workshop, because now we are going to end the workshop. So if you have any questions, the whole workshop, you can ask it now. Okay, so I'll just check if there's anything more to add to this slide. I believe that not. So if I would have to end my workshop with something, I would say that remember to firstly always explain your engagement. So not only say that haha, there's a mistake in my opponent's case, but also explain wholly why it isn't true. And with the weighing, remember to not only say that they're wrong, but also to show why you are better on that metric. And secondly, to always try to structure your engagement somehow. So to say that now I'm going to rebut that case, use the name of the argument that you're going to engage with, say how you are engaging with it, whether you are rebutting, saying why it's not true, or whether you are weighing. So you can either say this is not true, or you can say let's weigh, let's compare those arguments and then do it. And the last thing is that everything comes with practice. And if you're just not sure about something, you can always come back to that workshop. The slides will be there, and you can just go through it and check different ways of engagement. And that will be all for me. Thank you so much for your participation in it. I'm really happy that you are so active and I could talk with you. That's always really nice at the workshops. And now I will end the recording, so I can end.